Good evening. Welcome to Grace and Gavel, where truth meets compassion. My name is Buffy. I'm a 17-year plus criminal defense attorney. And today we are talking about the wide gambit, something a little bit different. There's something that we don't talk about enough. The way being judged publicly or privately changes how you see yourself. Not all at once, but slowly, quietly, in the background. Most of us have moments we wouldn't want replayed on the screen. A mistake, a season, a version of ourselves that makes us cringe now. And when that happens, the real danger isn't the mistake itself. It's the story we tell ourselves afterwards. For a lot of women, especially mothers, the story sounds a lot like this. I should have known better. If people really saw me, they'd think less of me. I can't come back from that. That's not wisdom talking, that's shame. And shame doesn't make us better, it makes us smaller. Here's what I've noticed, both personally and in the stories we tell culturally. When someone feels humiliated, dismissed, or underestimated, one of two things happens. They either collapse inward or they clamp down on control. Neither is healing. Some of us become hyper self-critical. Some of us become perfectionists. Some of us try to curate our image so carefully that we lose touch with who we actually are. And the tragedy is this. Most of the time, the moment that broke us wasn't even as defining as it felt. But because it felt public or felt exposed, it lodged itself into our nervous system as proof that we're unsafe to be seen. Here's the reframe that matters. If you've been dealing with shame or embarrassment or frustration of any kind. Making mistakes doesn't disqualify you from wisdom. Being judged doesn't erase your value. And growth doesn't require a clean record. It requires honesty. Real healing begins when you stop asking, how do I look now? And start asking, what did this teach me? Because learning doesn't mean excusing harm. It means integrating experience without letting it poison your identity. So if you're carrying something you wish you had done differently, a parenting moment, a relationship decision, a season where you were just surviving, you don't need to erase it. You need to metabolize it. You are allowed to evolve without self-punishment. You are allowed to rebuild trust with yourself. And you are allowed to contribute something meaningful, even if your story isn't tidy, isn't clean, isn't wrapped in a bow. Redemption in real life is quiet. It looks like humility. It looks like accountability. It looks like choosing not to become bitter. And most of all, it looks like refusing to let one chapter narrate the rest of your life. What's a moment I still replay that no longer deserves that much power? You can think on that. These are some reflection prompts. Am I punishing myself for something I've already learned from? What would it look like to trust myself again? Not perfectly, but honestly. What wisdom did that season give me that I didn't have before? These are all great reflections. So let's go on to the outsider versus the prince. Two men, same debate, same night. And yet America didn't see the same thing. In 1960, politics changed forever, not because of policy, but because of perception. In 1960, Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy faced off in the first televised presidential debate. Those who listened on the radio thought Nixon won. Those who watched on television overwhelmingly chose Kennedy. This episode explores the moment politics shifted from substance to image, and how that shift reshaped leadership, elections, and public judgment. We examine Nixon as the outsider, shaped by poverty, loss, and relentless pressure to prove himself, and Kennedy as the prince, confident, composed, and visually effortless in a new media age. This is not a story of villains and heroes. It's a story of insecurity, perception, and the psychological cost of always needing to belong, and how one night planted the seeds for everything that followed. If you enjoy thoughtful, narrative-driven analysis of power, justice, and human behavior, consider liking, subscribing, or sharing this episode. Next, we're going to talk about when pressure exposes the cracks. What happens when ambition collides with fear? Sometimes people don't rise to the moment, they unravel. The 1960 debate didn't create Richard Nixon's paranoia, it activated it. In this episode, we explore the fear, insecurity, and the need for control, how the need for control can quietly distort judgment over time. From enemy lists to hypervigilance, we trace how psychological pressure reshapes decision-making long before scandal ever breaks. This is not an excuse for wrongdoing. It's an examination how unchecked fear corrodes leadership and how Watergate wasn't a sudden collapse, but the result of years of internal strain. Most importantly, we confront the moment Nixon chose to stop, when he realized the truth could no longer be outrun. Fear doesn't protect power, it distorts it. This episode looks at what happens when pressure goes unchecked and why collapse is rarely sudden. Join the conversation by sharing your thoughts or suggesting future topics you'd like to explore. The man who didn't disappear. Most disgraced leaders vanish. Richard Nixon did not. And that decision to stay, to speak, to re-enter history may be the most misunderstood part of his story. After Watergate, Richard Nixon became a national symbol of disgrace. Forced to resign, publicly humiliated, and politically finished, most expected him to disappear from public life altogether. Instead, he did something unexpected. In this episode, we examine Nixon's post-presidency years, from isolation and reflection to his reemergence as senior statesman. We explore his role in opening diplomatic relations with China and how history slowly complicated the narrative of a man once reduced to a single scandal. This is not about erasing wrongdoing. It's about examining whether accountability and contribution can coexist, and whether redemption is possible without exoneration. What happens after disgrace? This episode looks at accountability, humility, and the complicated idea of redemption without rewriting history. If you value nuanced historical analysis over simplified narratives, consider liking, subscribing, or sharing this episode. Let's talk about public failure and private humanity. What if your worst moment followed you forever? What if the thing you regret most played on a loop, on screens, in textbooks, in public memory? Even when people saw you down the street, they would say, that's the person that XYZ. Public failure doesn't end when the cameras turn off. In this episode, we examine the psychological cost of public shame, not as a defense of wrongdoing, but as an exploration of what it means to live after exposure. Using Richard Nixon's resignation as a lens, we reflect on how society judges failure, why moral absolutism often replaces understanding, and how truly stopping, can be an act of responsibility rather than weakness. This episode asks a difficult question. Can we hold people accountable without stripping them of their humanity? And just as importantly, how would we hope to be judged if our own worst moments were public? You are not your worst moment. This episode explores shame, accountability, and the quiet courage it takes to stop instead of spiraling. If this episode resonated, you're welcome to share it or leave a thoughtful comment. Conversation matters here. Power, perception, and the courage to stop. History loves clean stories. Heroes and villains, winners and failures, legends and disgraces. But real life isn't clean, and neither are the people who shape it. This episode brings together the full arc of the Grace and Gavel Nixon-Kennedy series, not to relitigate history, but to understand it. From the 1960 debate that shifted power from substance to image, to the pressure that quietly distorted judgment, to the rare act of stopping instead of doubling down. This synthesis explores what these events reveal about leadership, fear, and accountability. John F. Kennedy became a symbol, preserved by an early death and an enduring myth. Richard Nixon lived long enough to be exposed, disgraced, and slowly reevaluated. Neither story is simple, and that complexity matters. This episode asks difficult questions. Why do we prefer polished icons over flawed humans? What happens when fear replaces discernment? And is stopping, truly stopping, sometimes the most responsible act a person can take? This is not a defense of wrongdoing. It is an invitation to think more carefully about power, judgment, and the humanity behind public failure. Image versus substance as the turning point in modern power. Fear is a driver of overreach and control, the cultural obsession with moral absolutism. redemption without exoneration, and why accountability should include limits, not annihilation. History isn't shaped by perfect people, it's shaped by human ones, especially the ones who learned too late. This episode ties the whole story together. If you value nuance over outrage and reflection over reaction, you're invited to like, subscribe, or share this episode with someone who enjoys thoughtful conversations about power and justice. Thank you for tuning in to our series today, and I hope you will come back and see us again soon. Feel free to like and subscribe and share with maybe a history buff that you know, and keep tuning in. Thank you so much. Hope you have a great day and come back and see us again. Bye-bye.